Alright everyone, and welcome to another edition of American League East Recap. On today's show I wanted to spend just a brief minute or two talking about the news earlier in the week that the self-imposed deadline from Vladimir Guerrero Jr., the Toronto Blue Jays all-star slugging first baseman, his self-imposed deadline to agree on a long-term contract extension had come and gone without said extension, and therefore Guerrero made it clear that he would be heading to free agency when the 2025 season ended. Big thought for me is I feel the Blue Jays now are going to have a really hard time signing this guy again. The biggest reason I feel that that's going to be true is because he will be competing with 29 other clubs. That's something that Guerrero Jr. alluded to during his press conference in Dunedin, Florida on Tuesday morning, which was the first official day of workouts for the Toronto Blue Jays. That's the biggest problem. The Blue Jays will now be competing with 29 other clubs for his services. And it's not just 29 clubs. It's one club in particular, that being the New York Mets, who have the majors' richest owner. And I think Steve Cohen and his influence here is going to be very important to watch. We heard about it during the Juan Soto sweepstakes, and we observed it, in fact, when the Mets ultimately signed Juan Soto. Steve Cohen is willing to do whatever he wants in order to sign a player that he deems to be worthy. And it does seem that Cohen especially prioritizes those younger players who have multiple years in their prime still to go. He's willing to bid extra high and go long term on those kind of players. And Guerrero Jr. will be entering free agency exactly 1 year older than Juan Soto did. And Guerrero Jr. is one of the better players in Major League Baseball. We also heard during those negotiations that Cohen would be willing to top any offer that was out there. I know we heard something like he would be willing to top it by $50 million. But the point is, he was willing to go all out. And that's going to be the biggest problem for the Blue Jays next winter, is that they're going to be competing with someone in Steve Cohen who's willing to do $50 million more than whatever the offer is out there. So let's say the offer is $600 million. Cohen's willing to do $610. If the Blue Jays hike their offer to $605, Cohen's willing to go to $620. The point is, when Cohen wants the player, he's willing to do whatever it takes. And we even saw that with Soto. He hands the family these special suites, he gives them a clothing allowance. That's all reportedly, admittedly. But he's willing to do whatever it takes. And that's the problem. The Blue Jays are a team that plays in Canada, and typically, given that they struggle to sign so many free agents, always have to overpay and maybe spend more in free agency than they're comfortable with. And in this case, ironically, Guerrero has said he wants to stay in Toronto. He likes Toronto and wants to be a Blue Jay for life, but if he opens himself up to 20 other teams and Steve Cohen, the Blue Jays will also have to pay a tax in order to keep him away from the arms of Steve Cohen. So that's the biggest problem. And the Blue Jays had an opportunity before this self-imposed deadline to exclusively negotiate with Guerrero Jr. It appears that window is closed, and Guerrero is putting himself out to free agency in which his bidding could go very high. And in fact, Cohen will be one of the biggest suitors. He's listed. The Mets, the Yankees, the Red Sox are all listed as one of Guerrero's biggest suitors next winter. So that's my thought. My thought is that his time in a Blue Jay uniform is coming to an end, and they're going to have a really hard time fending off Steve Cohen next winter. But in the meantime, we do have to kind of shift over to 2025, given that he will be here, Guerrero, in Toronto for 2025, and it's important to kind of focus on that. Clearly, Toronto has big aspirations, lofty ambitions here in 2025 to contend in the American League East, and Guerrero Jr. certainly figures to be a big part of that. So we'll keep talking about that part of it. We'll worry about the free agency next winter in a couple months when we get there. And until we talk about that again, this has been another edition of American League East Recap.